Africa, into Central Africa. And he has also planned on stationing drone places in Africa. Djibouti is now the place where that is. And the idea is to identify some terrorist groups in the Horn of Africa and destroy them. But what happens down the line is what we should actually think critically about.
Correct.
We're also fighting a different type of a war, if I can, or imminent danger, because we're using drone technology, but we're dealing with people who do not care to use drone technology. They do not mind self-sacrifice. And so they will, just as the Japanese in World War II, would kamikaze pilots would purposely go to war and sacrifice themselves to wipe out American troops and ships. So now we're fighting against people who will strap bombs to themselves. Or if they're not using drones, they could easily pilot a plane and just at random.
Okay.
In addition to the fact that, I mean, this is a sort of endless engagement, because you might kill a bunch of would-be or potential terrorists, what you might characterize as a terrorist, but there are thousands upon thousands of individuals waiting to take over those roles. So when does it end? Until you kill whole populations of nations? I mean, that's the thing that's really scary for me as well. You know?
Yeah, well, the military, the other side of that argument is the counterinsurgency argument, that the military has spent millions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan on campaigns, if you will, that would lead to people having a different view of the United States. That would lead to people having more educational options, that would lead to these other things. Now, I'm not saying that what you're saying is not true, because it very well is, but on the military side, the argument would be made that we're not just trying to fight an ideology by killing it, we're also trying to fight an ideology through these other methods. Now, the question is, how much are we doing, and is this effective? People would argue that it is, but that's where really I think some of the debate is as well.
Well, I think it's largely ineffective because the strategy is an incoherent one. Look at it this way. There are two things we want to do. We want to eliminate terrorists, people who will come and attack us, as in Bush doctrine, engage in preemption before they do it. On the other hand, we also want to remove leaders who are suppressing their own people. Yeah. The two strategies are different. If we want to eliminate terrorists in their individual being, in their own places, that strategy is different. You can do it with a drone. And if you want to remove leaders because they are authoritarian or suppressing or abusing human rights, the strategy is also different.
Sure.
So the question is, which strategy are we pursuing here? With the death of Gaddafi, you can see that what we are pursuing is removing a leader who is suppressing his people. With the removal of Saddam Hussein, on the other hand, we want to target terrorists. So the thing is to come out with an innovative foreign policy in this post-9/11 era, where citizens will be engaged in terms of understanding what is best in terms of preserving American interests, both at home and abroad. But we cannot do that unless we have an honest debate about what we want.
That's that's an extremely important point. You know, we are in a situation where we do have two different goals, and yet we have the conversation as though they're all sort of part of the same goal. So many people believe that by getting rid of a leader like Gaddafi, that we are in many ways fighting the war on terror. Now, obviously, people have shown that there has been a link between Gaddafi and some terrorist groups historically. But the question becomes, is this the way that we fight this war? Because if it is, then we got a lot of other places to go.
That's right.
And financially, the question becomes, can we afford it?
Right.
And militarily, can we afford it? Can we afford it in public perception? And this is something that, I mean, I'm sure it concerns all of you. We're sitting here talking about it. I mean, I think we all are concerned about it.
That is clearly the incoherence I was alluding to. Gaddafi has been there for 42 years. If you look around Africa, you would also see many seat-tight presidents
Sure.
who have been there for decades, who are also abusing human rights. But we are now going after them. Is it because they are doing what we want? Paul Biya in Cameroon is a very good example. He has been there since 1981. There is no freedom of press there. There is nothing going on. And he wins election after election. He is over 80 years old.
Sure.
Why don't we go to Cameroon and say, Paul Biya, it's time to go? But we cannot do that. In the Middle East, we are concerned with terrorism. There are also leaders there who are abusing human rights. So the question is, which leaders are we going to pursue in terms of removing them because they are suppressing human rights and abusing the rights of their people? Which ones are we going to allow to continue to do the same thing? It becomes very difficult.
And it's interesting, the double standard that exists. Because we just had a situation where our relationship with, well, we don't really have a relationship, but the relationship with Iran is already strained, but was even more strained with news that the Iranians had attempted to assassinate the Saudi ambassador. And so we look at them and we say, well, God, doggone it, that is a reason why we ought to go into Iran and get rid of the leadership, because they're trying to assassinate people. And yet the U.S. government's policy in this way has been the same thing. Now, I am a firm believer that we need a good military, we need a strong military. Right now, we spend about 22% of our federal budget on defense. I am not necessarily in the camp that we need to slash military spending, that sort of thing, because I think we are afforded a certain safety from our military spending. However, I think we have some moral questions and some moral issues that we have to debate. And this is why it is so important for us to have these conversations, because unfortunately in the political world, you either are at the place where you are gung-ho and you will not challenge the military at all, or you're at the place where you're completely anti-war, anti-military. Somewhere in the middle is a sensible opinion.
You make a very good point. I mean, and I think this, again, begs the question, what is the role of America and our global community? What role are we attempting to, or what effect are we attempting to elicit within the global community? For every dollar that we spend on war, that's a dollar that we don't spend on education, which we know needs to be invested in. Any metric you use demonstrates that we are on the decline, in terms of college graduates, K through 12 graduates, or K through 12 students. We're not educating our populace like we once did, and that's affecting us. I mean, we look at the job market situation. There are jobs out there. There are high-skilled jobs that are available here in the United States of America, even with over 9% unemployment rate. But we don't have enough highly skilled workers to take on those jobs, which speaks to an education gap, a skills gap. So should we be investing there? Where should we be taking these dollars and investing them properly? I'm with you. I think we all love the security that 22% allotment affords us. But I guess the bigger question is there a better way that we can be spending that money, militarily or otherwise?
And our education system in America has dropped from the top 10, and now we're at the 14th place in the world with education. So Rashid makes an excellent point about where does the money go.
Okay, back to your point on Iran. Without defending the nefarious regime in Iran in any shape or form, in truth, we have been itching to go to war with Iran. So when we are presented with something like they want to kill the ambassador, we need to very closely investigate that claim, because this is coming on the heels of going to war over weapons of mass destruction. So I think that we shouldn't be in a hurry to launch another war against Iran. Let them have something that is more concrete against us, and then we can do so.
You guys mentioned something earlier that
it makes me very nervous.
You mean both. You mean both. I think we can all agree on that point.
Indeed.
You mentioned something earlier that I think is we didn't get a chance to touch on. You guys talked about the presidency, both of you actually mentioned this, whether you realize it or not. I think it was very interesting, about the presidency and whether that person had ever had military experience or been to war, that sort of thing. How important do you think that is when it comes to these questions of declaring war and sort of what we're talking about overall today? How important is it that the president has some background in military when we're making these decisions?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of difference. I mean, for instance, I can't very well try to set policy about how to engage young people in our communities, because we have a little civil war happening all across the inner cities of America. I can't really have a proper perspective on that unless I'm there in that capacity dealing with those issues every day, unless I understand the dynamics of how young people engage with one another and what are some of the dynamics that lead to them being violent, having violent tendencies, and what sort of factors lead to those outcomes. And so in the same respect, I don't think that our political leadership can really have a viable say-so about these things unless they're there in some capacity to really truly appreciate, not just from afar, but on the ground, what the factors are that are characterizing this perceived hostility, right? And what the basis for this intervention might be. Now, I'm not saying that everybody on Capitol Hill and the president needs to go and put on a military vest and pick up a gun and go to war, but I am saying there has to be some increased engagement there and an increased sensitivity, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. But I also think that, and I'm in agreement with you, Rashid, but that's why the president has a cabinet. He can't possibly know everything about everything. Yeah. And so he has this body of advisors that we trust are knowledgeable in their area, in their specific area, so that they can advise him with good information, so that he makes the best decision. So that doesn't necessarily mean that every president should have been a member of the military, but if he has competent people that is giving him the right advice, I think that that counts as well.
But are we putting, on another note, I think, aren't we putting too much responsibility or blame on the president? In this issue of going to war and all these different wars, what the presidents have done, these issues have been very, very popular. So President Obama, for instance, I don't necessarily think his foreign policy reflects necessarily his own will, but the will of the people. Right. When he came into office, he campaigned because the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were unpopular. So he promised to get rid of, to reduce the number of troops in Iraq, which he did, and then to move those troops or that focus over to Afghanistan, which he did, which based on polls at the time was exactly what the people wanted. So we're looking at this question of these presidents going to war, and there's starting what are not necessarily officially wars. But isn't this really an issue what the people want?
I think military experience is clearly important, but less important than the president's own personality and other interests involved. If we look at Obama's policy in Afghanistan, there is a little bit of vacillation. He came and by now the troops would have been over. He hesitated, he formed, he brought people together, and the troops are still there and they are still dying. So it seems to me that...
Unfortunately, we actually just are out of time, unfortunately.
Justin, it was getting good.
Yeah, it was getting good, actually. What I would suggest is if you guys could just give me very quickly just one final point, maybe 10 seconds or so, just to wrap this conversation up. Let me start with you.
Yeah, sure. Again, I think that we need to just think more critically about engaging in any war-like activities before we actually do.
Awesome.
I think that the idea of targeting individuals and killing them for whatever reason is not a long-range policy we should pursue at this time.
Awesome.
This nation was founded on Christian principles, on the Bible, and one of that mandates is to pray for our leaders that they have good direction and wisdom.
Awesome. Thank you very much. How we define a war is not merely a matter of semantics. In the past half century, the way America enters and wages military conflicts has shifted dramatically. The economic and human cost, however, remain the same. I hope this conversation helps you to consider what we gain and what we lose as our definition of war changes to fit these times. For the professors, I'm Ted Williams. Thanks for watching.